On April 1st, 1984, music legend Marvin Gaye was shot dead inside his home in LA, and the perpetrator was his own father. The killing marked the chilling end of what was a disturbing father and son relationship. Marvin Gaye Sr. was a preacher at the Hebrew Pentecostal Church in Washington, D.C., which incorporated very strict rules such as the banning of film and TV, makeup, sleeveless dresses, and open-top shoes. In 1935, Marvin Sr. married Alberta Cooper, and they would go on to have 4 kids together, including Marvin Gaye Jr. The dark aspect of this family was that Alberta Cooper had a child from another relationship before she met Marvin Sr., and Marvin Sr. refused to raise another man's child. So this child was instead raised by Alberta's sister. In a 1979 interview, Albert spoke about the difficult relationship Marvin Sr. had towards Marvin Jr. She said, "My husband never wanted Marvin, and he never liked him. He used to say he didn't think he was really his child. I told him that was nonsense. He knew Marvin was his. But for some reason he didn't love Marvin, and what's worse, he didn't want me to love Marvin either. Marvin wasn't very old before he understood that." Despite his reputation as a devout Christian, Marvin Sr. gave in to a number of temptations that went against his beliefs. He became a heavy drinker and a serial womanizer to the extent that he had another kid from a different marriage and raised that kid behind Alberta's back. On top of this, he was trying to impart Christian values onto his kids, but took this to a level that some would consider extreme. His kids would be forced to recite Bible verses, and if they were unable to repeat them word for word, they would be beat. He also withheld food from them with the belief that this would bring them closer to God. The upside to this upbringing was that Marvin got into music through attending church and learned to sing and play. Ultimately, this wasn't a happy home, and Marvin Gaye told his biographer, David Ritz, "Living with father was like living with a king, an all-cruel, changeable, and all-powerful king. And if it wasn't for mother, who was always there to console me and praise me for my singing, I think I would have been one of those child suicides you read about in the papers." As Marvin reached his teens, he was now performing music outside of a church setting and joined the doo-wop group DC Tones. At 17, Marvin managed to escape the rule of his father by joining the military. After a few months, he faked a mental illness to get discharged. He then joined the doo-wop group The Marquis, which evolved into another group known as the Moonglows. Marvin Gaye often worked as a session musician and was given the opportunity to perform in front of Berry Gordy, the then president of Motown Records. Marvin Gaye got signed to Motown and changed the spelling of his last name. Originally, it was spelled G-A-Y, but he added an E at the end. This was to make sure nobody thought he was actually gay, and also distance himself a bit from his father. On the surface, everything looked positive for Marvin Gaye. The success of his early singles led him to become Motown's biggest artist. He found love and married a woman named Anna Gordy, the sister of the Motown president, and despite the turbulent relationship he had with his father, he moved his parents to a better neighborhood in Washington, D.C., and gave his mother enough money so that she wouldn't have to work again. What's particularly tragic about Marvin Gaye's life is that when he got married to his wife, he was almost reliving the reckless life of his father. He was incredibly promiscuous to the extent that he impregnated Anna's 15-year-old niece, which forced Anna to pretend that she was pregnant and then take care of his child as her own when it was born. He was also becoming heavily addicted to weed and coke. Marvin's musical success continued throughout the 60s with love songs such as Once Upon a Time, Ain't No Mountain, and Heard It Through the Grapevine. In the early 70s, Marvin's music became more politically charged when he co-wrote the song What's Going On, a track inspired by his brother's return home from Vietnam and the civil rights movement. However, his new brand of socially conscious music was met with contempt by Motown Records. In 2016, Berry Gordy recalled first hearing about the album and said, "I was in the Bahamas trying to relax. He called and said, 'Look, I've got these songs.' When he told me they were protest songs, I said, 'Marvin, why do you want to ruin your career?' He famously described the song What's Going On as, quote, 'the worst thing I ever heard in my life.'" Eventually, Gaye said he would not work on any other music until it was released, and Motown reluctantly released it. The LP became Motown's greatest selling album at that time, with Rolling Stone magazine proclaiming it Album of the Year. Decades later, in 2020, the magazine placed it #1 in their 500 greatest albums of all time. What's Going On and Marvin Gaye's 2 subsequent albums, Let's Get It On and I Want You, also peaked in the top 10 of the US album charts. But by the late 70s, Marvin Gaye's lavish lifestyle took its toll and he got into severe amounts of debt. In 1975, he was separated from Anna Gordy, leading to a divorce settlement where she demanded $1 million, which would be about $7.7 million today. He also wasn't paying his taxes, so he owed vast sums of money to the IRS. The monthly alimony payments he owed to his ex-wife were so expensive that he just stopped paying them. Eventually, him and his ex-wife reached a deal where she would receive the royalties on future music he made. The first $307,000 of whatever he made from his next album would go straight into his ex-wife's pockets. So Gaye rather sarcastically called his next album "Here, My Dear." This album was a lot less successful, mainly because it was rushed to get it out as soon as possible, and Gaye was less motivated to make an album that primarily benefited his ex-wife. Marvin Gaye's run of chart-topping albums had come to an end, and the money was drying up. He was also suffering from physical exhaustion and drug abuse, so touring to make money back wasn't an easy option either. He got married again in 1977, but was separated by 1979, and by then, one of the most popular musicians of all time, Marvin Gaye, was living inside a bread truck in Hawaii. But to his relief, the 1982 song "Sexual Healing" would help revamp his career. This came at a time when he was suffering severe bouts of depression, and he's since said, "I was at my lowest ebb. I really didn't feel like I was loved, because I didn't feel love. I felt useless." On top of all these issues, Marvin's mother Alberta had fallen ill. Gaye decided to move back in with his parents in their Los Angeles home, and this was a disaster waiting to happen. Marvin Sr. and Marvin Jr. were back living under the same roof, and the tension between the two proved too much. In March of 1984, Marvin Sr. and Alberta were in an argument over a misplaced insurance policy letter. While this letter doesn't seem like that big of a deal, there were deep tensions bubbling beneath the surface. Marvin Sr. was no longer the dominant figure of the household and had been superseded by Marvin Jr. Jack Wiley from Far Out magazine wrote, "After becoming the breadwinner in the family, the balance of power shifted, but Marvin Gaye Sr. was still keen to impose himself and his wishes on his family. It meant when an insurance policy letter had gone missing, Alberta was in line to pay the price. Marvin Jr. could hear his father shouting at Alberta throughout the house. Alberta came into her son's room, and Marvin Jr. warned his father not to enter, but he did, and that's when things got violent." Alberta recalled, "Marvin hit him. I shouted for him to stop, but he paid no attention to me. He gave my husband some hard kicks. This led Alberta to separate the two from one another. Marvin Sr. then leaves the room but returns moments later holding a .38 caliber pistol. Alberta said, "I was standing about 8 feet away from Marvin when my husband came to the door of the bedroom with his pistol. My husband didn't say anything. He just pointed it at Marvin. I screamed, but it was very quick. He, my husband, shot, and Marvin screamed. I tried to run. Marvin slid down to the floor after the first shot." Marvin Jr. was shot in the chest and the shoulder. Marvin Gaye allegedly said his heartbreaking final words, "I got what I wanted. I couldn't do it myself, so I made him do it." Marvin Sr. then put the pistol back where he found it and waited on the porch of his home for the police to come and arrest him. Marvin Gaye Sr. has since spoken about this event, and in a jail cell interview he said, "I pulled the trigger. The first one didn't seem to bother him. He put his hand up to his face like he'd been hit with a BB. And then I fired again. I was backing up toward my room. I was going to go in there and lock the door." Marvin Sr. did not believe that he killed his son. It was only afterward that he was informed of this, and he said, "I just didn't believe it. I thought he was kidding me. I said, 'Oh, God of mercy.' It just shocked me. I just went to pieces. Just cold. I just sit there and I didn't know what to do. Just sitting there like a mummy." The simplest explanation of why he shot his son was that it was a moment of madness. His defense lawyers pointed out that there was a walnut-sized brain tumor growing inside him at the time, and this affected his ability to act within reason. The judge and jury decided that this was voluntary manslaughter and not a murder, concluding that there was no premeditation or planning involved. Steve Turner, who also wrote a biography on Marvin Gaye, claims that jealousy and power may have been factors too. Speaking about Marvin Sr., he said, "He fancied himself as a prophet and message giver, and then Marvin became hailed as a voice of his generation. And yet Marvin wasn't living a godly life. That seemed so unfair to Reverend Gaye. Also, Marvin was very close to his mother." Marvin Sr. went on to say that he deeply regretted his actions. He said, "If I could bring him back, I would. I was afraid of him. I thought I was going to get hurt. I didn't know what was going to happen. I'm really sorry for everything that happened. I loved him. I wish he could step through this door right now. I'm paying the price now." Marvin Gaye Sr.'s brain tumor was benign, and he lived until the age of 84 and died of pneumonia. Marvin Gaye Jr. was still in debt at the time of his passing, and his children didn't inherit anything until all of those debts were cleared. At the time of his passing, he had accumulated $9.2 million in debt, $4.5 million of which was owed to the IRS. However, the timelessness of Gaye's music has gradually paid these debts off, and his family should be set up for generations. While Marvin Gaye's life itself was littered with tragic and disturbing events, he did leave the world with a body of work that has unquestionably benefited humanity. The academic and author Michael Eric Dyson said, although Gaye was battling his own demons, he, quote, chased away the demons of millions with his heavenly sound and divine art. Make sure to subscribe for more.